Okay, let's see if I. Welcome to session number 2, excuse me, of Genesis in Depth. I'm Dr. John McMath. I'm joined here by my friends in Italy and in the Philippines and in various parts of the United States, probably ships at sea as well. We'll just have to see who all is here. And I'm lecturing here today from the palatial rooftop penthouse studio of North Idaho LJPF headquarters. And we've been studying Bible and theology for about 3.5 years now, since COVID panicked the world and made it difficult for us to travel. And it was so much fun that we've just kept doing that, even though we can travel again. Today, we'll be getting into the text of Genesis chapter 1. This is, uh, to say that this is an important passage is an understatement. To say that it is self-evident that this is important is also an understatement. It's difficult to estimate the importance of this passage because it holds at its core uh, the foundational truths on which the rest of biblical theology is built. So this is literally the the first principles. These things are uh, true not because theologians say so or because the church teaches it, but because God has revealed what no one else could reveal. He was the only witness to anything in this chapter. And he is letting us in on the mystery of the foundations of uh, existence, of material, and of life itself. Uh, if people sometimes say that they're struggling to understand the purpose of life. Well, a good place to begin is Genesis 1. People are struggling with finding meaning in life and purpose and a foundational set of truths. Well, a good place to start is Genesis 1. If we start here, and take seriously what we're seeing here, an awful lot of the rest of the Bible simply makes sense. Uh, and that, of course, is true of all of Genesis. But Genesis 1 lays the foundation for all the rest. Later on this summer, I'm going to be attending a conference back east uh, called a creation theology seminar. Several days where scholars will present papers about the significance of biblical creation to the development of the rest of theology. Everything that we know rests on this foundation. So Genesis 1 ends up being pretty important. I'll give you just an introduction to it, and I'll start working at it right from the beginning. Let's share the screen if I can manage that. Yes, there it is. Okay. Yeah. When we outline the book of Genesis, it falls very clearly into a primeval history and a patriarchal history. So the first 11 chapters of Genesis uh, serve as the history of everything prior to uh, Abraham and the nation of Israel. From Genesis 12 to 50, we see the first three patriarchs and one of the sons of a patriarch. So we get Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and then quite a detailed Joseph narrative. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And Jacob is the father of the 12. And one of the 12 is Joseph. Joseph will go down into Egypt and begin that sojourn of Israel that leads necessarily into the second book of the Old Testament, Exodus, where Moses is introduced. So Genesis comes prior to Moses, prior to the conquest narrative, prior to the Exodus. All of those things are later. Genesis lays out all of history before that time. Now we know that uh, the book of Exodus begins with a Pharaoh who didn't know Joseph and who hated the people of Israel. This has to have been right around 1500 years before Christ. Actually, 1520 would be the rise of that king. And that was a period of probably two generations of Israel's servitude in Egypt. Uh, Prior to that, there's 430 years, which takes us back to the time of Joseph. So there's 430 years in Egypt that we see just the beginnings of in Genesis. There's kind of a hole in the history there. Uh, Abraham dates back to about 2166 BC. That's the conventional date. That's probably about right. So 2166 years before Christ is approximately the birth date of Abraham. If we follow the genealogies backwards from Abraham all the way to Adam, we add an additional number of years, probably 2 to 3,000 years, depending on how you read the text. We'll talk about that a little more when we get to chapter 5. But for now, 2 or 3,000 years is a good enough round number. We know that um, civilization on Earth rose in the Nile Valley, the Mesopotamian Valley, and the Indus Valley of India at about the same time. There are three different language groups represented there. The Sanskrit language group, the Sumerian stroke Mesopotamian language groups, and the Egyptian or Hamitic language groups. So we've got three different languages going on in three different places at about the same time. That the Bible actually explains how that happened. The civilization happened in those places because those three different people groups speaking in remarkably different languages began writing their history at about the same time. We can track those histories back to sometime before 3000 BC. Some scholars have tried to narrow it down to 3300 BC, but not much earlier than that. Everything prior to that is what we call prehistory or prior to written history. Uh, so from the time of the division of languages back to the time of Adam is an indeterminate number of years. That's all the time between Genesis 11 and Genesis 1, in a couple of thousand years probably. But we'll talk about the precise number. It's traditional to date the creation at 4004 BC. That dates back to an Anglican bishop by the name of Ussher in the 17th century, who simply added up all of the genealogies in the King James Version of the Bible. That's not a bad way to start. It have been better to begin with a different set of manuscript evidences. But Bishop Usher did a great job, and that's the traditional date. I'm going to introduce you to some other possibilities as we get further along. For now, let's just say that the beginning, the creation time, is around 6 or 7 thousand years ago, not much more than that. Uh, and certainly not millions and millions of years. Let me show you what happens during the first week, and that's where we'll be today. We're going to go to uh, Genesis 1 through 2, 3, which is uh, generally called the prologue. Prologue is the thing that we say before we start saying what we intend to say. Okay, so it's the speech before the speech, and this particular prologue is one of the most important in all of literature, anyway. And this uh, in this passage, we see God introduced as the creator. A very interesting, a very important idea. The 6 days of the creation are unfolded one after the other. And in this passage is the foundation for all of the rest of biblical theology. If we deny God's creation or the timing of creation, we're essentially denying the reliability of God Himself. And that probably is not a good beginning point. So let's take a look at verse 1 and the picture of the initial creation. By the way, this image is a fragment of the Babylonian account of both the flood and the creation and some other things. The Babylonians had an entirely different idea about what happened. We'll introduce that in just a bit. I want to introduce some of the pagan creation accounts, but just look at what's going on here. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Okay, in the beginning, God. Uh, there is no argument here. The Bible doesn't begin with a 6 point argument for the existence of God. The Bible doesn't begin with a vast prehistory of God and His development as creator. It simply assumes His eternal existence and His supreme nature. That is all assumed. Uh, God doesn't have to argue that He is powerful enough to create the universe. He simply speaks it into being. The universe comes into being at the command of God. He is pre-existent. He is all powerful. He is all sufficient. God doesn't need the universe. There are some philosophical schools of thought that assume that God and the universe are uh, opposite poles of a single thing, and that God is always evolving and always changing and always. God never needs to change. He never gets larger. He's infinitely large. He never gets smaller because that's impossible. He never needs anything. Uh, he he creates what is not. There's no one above his pay grade. God is the supreme being in the sense that if we were to lay out all of the things that exist, and there are lots of them. I've got printers and computers and whatever, clocks and books, stuff here surrounding me. And if I were to lay all of these things out in their order of importance, I would find some are more important to me than others. I've got a Hebrew Bible here someplace. That's pretty important to me. Would I give up my computer for my Hebrew Bible? Well, hmm, good question, because I've also got a Hebrew Bible on my computer. Um, but I really don't want to give up my Hebrew Bible, if you see what I mean. You can assign various values to various things. And if you stack these up so that you're gradually piling up the things that are most important, you will eventually come to the supreme being. Now, it's not possible for there not to be a supreme being. Think about that for just a second, because that's really important. In reality, in at what we call an existential level, not a mythological level or uh, a desire level, but in reality, in the actual realm of that which exists, there must be a supreme being. And if that supreme being is a supernatural dog, well, that's okay, but that's what that is. And everyone has to pretty much uh, begin to understand what is the supreme being. For the materialists, for those who believe that there can be no God, there can be no supernatural being. Usually, the universe itself is the supreme being, uh, and they reach that conclusion by appealing to their supreme authority, which is their own personal thought processes. No matter how flawed those thoughts are, that is their supreme authority. The Bible gives us a different viewpoint. There is one God, creator of heaven and earth, who is the king and the judge, and is thus qualified to be the redeemer. I'm going to say that again. There is one God, the creator of heaven and earth, who is the king and therefore the judge, and because of that, must also be the redeemer. Uh, Without that relationship, virtually none of the rest of the Bible makes any sense at all. So, right there in the beginning, God says enough to lay the entire foundation for everything else that we're going to study in the whole rest of the Bible. In the beginning, God created. Uh, what did he create? The heavens and the earth. The heavens is everything we see when we look up: sun, moon, stars, miscellaneous satellites, black holes, whatever is out there, God created in the beginning. Now, how did he do that exactly? Simple. The Bible says he commanded it to be. Now, did he actually speak it into being? Well, the voice was probably not audible. All God ever has to do is think his command, and whatever it is, obeys. And so a thing that doesn't exist is commanded to exist by the mere thought process of God. Uh, The heavens and the earth is a shorthand way of saying everything that is not God. So everything that we see, everything that we are, everything we ever hope to own in life, every place that we ever hope to go was all created by God in exactly the same way. He brought it into being by the sheer power of his will. So heaven and earth, the object of creation, the creation does not create itself. That would be nonsense. The creation does not evolve out of nothing into something. That again would be nonsense. If the creation evolved, which I don't believe is true, then how did the initial stuff get there? The fundamental philosophical question that has to be answered before anything else makes any sense at all is this: why is there something rather than nothing at all? Until you've answered that question, all of your detailed scientific reasoning and the experiments on lab rats and whatnot doesn't make any difference. Yes, we know that bacteria evolve. Of course they do. This bacteria evolves into some different shape and size of bacteria. And the mice that we use to test bacteria on also evolve. So the little brown mouse eventually gives birth to little mice with white heads. Okay, how cool is that? Uh, yeah, that's pretty neat. But you'll never see a bacteria evolve into a mouse, and you'll never see a mouse evolve into a frog, and you'll never see a frog evolve into a bird. Um, and there are reasons for that. When we look at Genesis 1, we see how God created all of those things and what is possible and what isn't. So I need to drop back and take a look at the word create in Genesis. That first line has a great sound to it. Listen to the Hebrew: Bereshit bara Elohim et Hashemayim va'et haaretz. Okay, Hashemayim and haaretz are heaven and earth. Bereshit is the phrase in the beginning. The second complete word is bara, Bereshit, bara. Bara is the verb. It's a plain, old-fashioned third-person singular uh, 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 cal, normal stem uh, of the word. Bara means to make something out of nothing. But it's only used with God as the subject. So the third word in the Hebrew is God, Bereshit, bara, Elohim. The word Elohim is interesting. It's a plural and appears to reflect the majesty of God. It never translated gods. And uh, Elohim is the term supreme being, is to be contrasted with the personal name of God, which is Yahweh. We're going to get that name for God in the second chapter of Genesis. In this chapter, we're going to see nothing but Elohim. In the second chapter of Genesis, we're seeing the personal relationship between God and man. And there, God uses his personal name. Okay, Donna's coming up to tell me. Okay, hang on there. I'm working here on this. Let me stop the share for a second. Okay, can anyone hear me out there? I'm going to unmute everybody.
Yes, Dr. John.
You can hear.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Yes. I don't know why you can't, Donna.
No,
Uh, you can hear me
before we
okay.
can hear you, but that is 3 seconds only.
Okay.
Now you can hear.
Now we can. Okay. Wonder what happened. Now we can hear. Okay. Let's get the sharing going again. Well, I wish I had some way of checking precisely what's going on, but I don't. This it's kind of irritating. It's nice to have Donna downstairs to tell me when the sound gives up because I don't have any way of telling here. Oh, studio work is such fun. Uh, okay, on we go. So uh, God's existence is assumed. Bara means to create a thing. And every time we see bara, God is the subject of the word. So bara Elohim. Bereshit tells us when. In the beginning. Uh, it's literally Rosh. The B at the beginning is the preposition in or at, and Rashit is from the word head, at the head of the line, the first thing that ever happened. In the very front end of history, God created, or created he God. And so the creation there is a word that uh, speaks very explicitly about the command of God, the powerful will of God. He willed the heavens and the earth into being. The heavens and earth simply saluted smartly and came into being. There is no particular process being described here. Now, later when we get to verse 2, we're going to see there is a 6-day process, but this doesn't imply an evolution or millions or billions of years. And we'll talk about the days of Genesis here in just a bit. But the term create always refers to a quote creation out of nothing unquote. The Latin for that is ex nihilo. And that Latin word is found, of course, in the Vulgate of the Bible, the Vulgate version that Roman Catholics still use to this day as their authority. And that's an excellent um, addition to the term create. Now, in other places, we've got words that mean to make things out of other things. So God formed Adam's body out of the dust of the earth. God formed Eve's body out of Adam's rib. Just a fascinating distinction all by itself. But those terms are not bara. We see bara in the bringing into existence of something that has no parts. It doesn't exist, and it's something that can never be done by men. We simply cannot create out of nothing. Now we can do creative things. We reflect the glory of God when we create things out of other things. So, for example, if I were uh, to take a bunch of raw materials and create some new product, a, a, a brand new, wonderful tennis shoe that nobody had ever thought of before, That would be a creative act. But I would be obviously making the tennis shoe out of stuff, uh, whatever, leather and nylon and plastic and rubber, whatever I'm making the tennis shoe out of. But I would be doing it creatively. An artist is doing something creative when it's real art. People who throw buckets of paint at a canvas are not artists. The idiots who spray paint university walls are not artists. Uh, but to do something of lasting value and genuine beauty using materials is a creative act. But they're not doing something out of nothing. They're using materials. God did not need to use materials. He created out of nothing. Now, the term "in the beginning" or a sheet is something we need to think about for just a moment, because it is such an unusual moment. Uh, Lots of things have beginnings. The beginning of my life happened 75 years ago in a place called Bellingham. Uh, but I had precursors. We call them parents. And, uh, and my parents came into being long before that. And they gave birth to me. And there I was. And I grew up, and we've had kids and now grandkids. And there's a whole lot of making going on, but no creating. The beginning of all things is that point in time before which there was nothing, and after which all of space and time began to unroll. I believe that prior to the creation, God did not, or perhaps better say, does not experience time. He is literally eternal. The Latin there is spelled with an AE, so eternal, having no time uh, boundaries or no time progression. So for God, the past, the present, and the future are a constant now. The same is true with space. For God, there is no here and there. There is only the constant here. And he experiences all things in all places at all times instantaneously. That's what one of the things that makes God different from us. We don't. We are time bound. And that means that we can track our existence back to a specific personal beginning point, and we can track all of history back to a specific beginning point. All material things are finite in both directions. That is, all material things have a beginning point and an ending point. It's literal nonsense to speak otherwise. There's no such thing as an eternal space-time continuum. It doesn't exist and cannot exist. It must have a beginning point. It must have an ending point. Now, we don't know where the end is. Maybe we can't measure where the beginning is, but the existence of a beginning and an end are absolutely essential for any sequence of material things or any existence of material things. Uh, that's true philosophically, and it's also true empirically. Uh, I could give you examples of this. You could visualize an infinite library, for example. an infinite number of books on an infinite number of shelves. Well, what if somebody came into the library and took one for a week to go read it? Would it suddenly be infinity minus one? How many books is infinity minus one? What if some publisher somewhere published another book and brought it to the infinite library? Yes, you know, visualize that. Are you going to have to build another shelf? But I thought it was already infinite. Uh, there is no such thing as an infinite library or an infinite parking lot or an infinitely large automobile. Everything has its limits. Uh, and all material things have their limits. They cannot ever possibly be infinite, either in time or space. They're very interesting at a philosophical level. But we're going to leave it at that. I just want you to think about everything that's packed into this first verse of Genesis, and everything that's there is important for the development of later theology. We built everything on the existence of God, on the nature of the material universe as a created object, as the power of God to create out of nothing. And we recognize that everything that has a beginning has an end, and a thing with a beginning and a creator has a purpose. And that purpose will either be achieved or not. And the Creator will judge the value of his created object on the basis of its achievement of his purpose. And all of the rest of theology follows from that beginning point. So people who say, oh, well, Genesis 1 is just poetry, it has no particular importance, have literally missed the point. They haven't spent enough time with it to understand what God is actually doing here. Now, let's go on into some other stuff. Oh, what happened here? Everything went out. That is not supposed to happen. Can I get back to? Okay, there we go. Um, we're going to look through some of the pagan alternatives to the creation account. We're going to look at atheistic materialism as a philosophical um, way of thinking. We're going to look briefly at theistic evolution, a thing that I really don't care for very much for a variety of reasons. And we're going to consider the age of the earth. I just want to walk through uh, some of this backstory. Let's go on. The pagan nations, particularly the Egyptians, the Mesopotamians, and even the Hittites, have creation accounts. Everybody has to account one way or another for the existence of something rather than nothing at all. And they do, in fact, do that. The Egyptians have stories that go way, way back. These stories were told in different places by different people groups in Egypt. They were, to some extent, mutually exclusive. That is, the uh, Atum people didn't really agree with the Memphis people or the repulsing the dragon people. And there were probably half a dozen other creation stories amongst the Egyptians that we've lost. These are the three that are accessible today. So the creation by Atum comes in two versions that we found at a place in Egypt called Heliopolis. Uh, and this is a creation uh, by uh, by the god Atum, who is otherwise not mentioned much in Egyptian mythology. And Atum simply spoke the other gods into being. Okay? So there's an assumption of lots and lots and lots and lots of gods. The Egyptians had several thousand. Uh, they're mostly the forces of nature. So the frog is animated by a god. The Nile River is animated by a god. The sun, of course, is very important. The sun is called either Amun or Ra, and eventually Amun Ra. The, two different gods. They just merged them into one god so that they could quit arguing. And they still argued about that. They say no. There's in addition to Amun and Ra, there's uh, the Amun, which is the effulgence or uh, the rays of sunlight that come and hit us. And they argued about all of this, but the created universe, the things that make up creation, are worshipped as gods. But all of the all of the various gods were created out of whatever materials came to hand by the sky god Atum. We've got some other sky gods and great gods that are mentioned in some other mythology, but Atum is one of the more important of these. The other thing that comes out of the Atum mythology is the pyramid. The this dates to around 3000 BC. The oldest pyramids in Egypt date to about the beginning of the uh, civilization in the Nile Valley, and we begin finding pyramids. The pyramids were meant to be imitation mountains. Uh, they were places where the gods could come down, and where the dead could find their way to God. It's an interesting thing, and it doesn't just happen in uh, the Nile Valley. We also see this in Mesopotamia. I'm not sure about the Indus Valley. I really haven't studied that archaeology. The Memphis theology also is very early. It dates to around 3000 BC in Memphis. This is the first dynasty of the Egyptian royalty that's mentioned by a much later Greek author named Manetho. And this is a creation by yet another god by the name of Ptah. Uh, and his creation is a creation by uh, uh, commanding speech, which is fascinating because the Memphis theology puts an emphasis on a creation by powerful words. His thoughts became words. His speech of command resulted in the creation of all the other gods. In all of these cases, uh, the uh, the material objects of the universe are thought of as gods. The myth of the repulsing of the dragon is a fascinating thing. This happens, or this is first seen in tablets of during the third millennium BC. About 2800 BC is our earliest introduction to this. And this is a picture of yet another great god, Ra, the sun god, fighting with the dragon of chaos. Okay. Now, that's an important thing for our understanding, because in a very real sense, the chaos dragon of the Bible is Satan, and he's often called that great dragon. Uh, the biblical story is not given to us in a vacuum. And there are, in fact, uh, cultural ideas that form at least part of the background of the Bible. We're going to see some of that here, right here in Genesis 1. Uh, uh, but this isn't the Bible copying uh, pagan mythology. This is the Bible using pagan ideas that are in fact apt. So the idea that there is good and there is evil, and the sun god is good and the chaos dragon is bad. Order is better than chaos. Well, I think we can agree with that. We're not going to call Satan the chaos dragon necessarily, but it's an interesting visual. And in Ra's fight with the chaos dragon, he uses the chunks of the chaos dragon as he tears him apart in order to create all of the other gods. So, what all of them have in common is that there is one great God who creates all of the other gods. Now, they disagree with one another. They're mutually exclusive and contradictory. They don't relate very well to reality, but they do recognize uh, the fact that everything has to have a beginning. And there's a great deal of ignorance here, but they recognize that everything has to be created by one. There can only be one great God. And in that, they're correct. And in saying everything has to have a beginning, they're correct. So I would believe that the Egyptian stories are a corrupt version of an original creation story. Uh, that uh, it was passed down, but it was debased. It was corrupted by people who no longer believed it, and elements of it found their way into the Egyptian mythology. Let's look at the Sumerian story. This is complex. It's Enki and Ninhursag. Okay, and it's kind of a love story. It's based in a place called Dilmun, which is a paradise of sweet water and agriculture. And out in the desert of Sumeria, a nice place with fresh water and growing things would have been like paradise on earth. To some extent, that was the Tigris and Euphrates Valley of Mesopotamia. So the Sumerians are the oldest of the cultures that we know of to have invented both literature and mythology. And the story of Enki and Ninhursag is actually kind of awful. Enki and Ninhursag are both gods. Well, actually, Enki is a god and Ninhursag is a goddess. And Enki attacks Ninhursag. She becomes pregnant, gives birth to yet another god by the name of Ninmu, uh, who in turn becomes pregnant by the first god Enki and gives birth to yet another goddess by the name of Utu, who is Enki's great granddaughter somehow. Ninhursag then gives Utu the advice that she is not to spend any time at all with Enki until he brings her a gift of cucumbers, apples, and grapes. All right, I'm not making this stuff up. The result of Utu's pregnancy with Enki appears to be a variety of fruit trees. And that's all we have of that particular mythology, but you can tell from the beginning that this is not a great start. this is a kind of a funny story, and it's also a bit disgusting. No, if you read it, you would say, well, here are people who have really forgotten what it's all about. The Babylonians had a couple of very, very important stories that they told. One is the Enuma Elish, and the other is the Atrahasis. Enuma Elish is the primary Babylonian story of creation. We have it in several dozen different cuneiform versions. These are things that the scholars love to study, and they go in and out of the various uh, tablets of the Enuma Elish. Now, this is very important stuff. This is the story of a couple of gods, Apsu the boy and Tiamat the girl, very like Enki and Ninhursag. It's a romance at the beginning. It's all about Apsu and Tiamat and the begetting of all the other gods. Notice the common thread. There's a male and female, and they're giving birth to all of the other gods. So Tiamat and Apsu uh, were going through time just loving each other and having a wonderful time until one day Tiamat decided to murder Apsu. Uh, she got mad at him for, I don't know, not sweeping the living room or something. I don't know what Apsu did to deserve murder, but Tiamat decided to murder Apsu with the result that the earth and the sea and the sky were created. Okay? Uh, Apsu's corpse became the dry land. His blood became the freshwater lakes and rivers. And Tiamat, who was now a widow, uh, began to cry, and her tears became the saltwater oceans. Okay, isn't that great? Uh, and when that was while that was happening, we are introduced to yet another god, Marduk, who shows up on the scene and beats back the chaos monster. Okay, so we've got another chaos monster, is a different chaos monster altogether than what the Egyptians are talking about. And the chaos monster is beaten back. Man was created because the gods who were now multiplying in the universe needed servants. The gods didn't know how to cook or clean or wash clothes, so servants needed to be created, and thus religion was created by the need of the gods for somebody to sacrifice to them. Uh, it's it's literally that stupid. Um, and again, we're seeing the parallels to the other ancient Near Eastern stories. Atrahasis is uh, a bit of mythology that doesn't occupy quite as many tablets as the Enuma Elish, and it doesn't seem to have been popular for quite as long a period. Nevertheless, we've got just about all of the Atrahasis cycle. This is a whole cycle of stories about the gods, about the creation of man, about sin in general, and about the flood. The Atrahasis cycle is associated with another whole cycle we call the Gilgamesh epic. Gilgamesh is the first and greatest of the hero kings of Babylonian mythology. And Gilgamesh is fascinating because of his interactions with a character named Utnapishtim, who is the Babylonian version of Noah. So Atrahasis is actually pretty important. And again, it's the basic creation account in Atrahasis is of the gods cohabiting and giving birth to a bunch of other gods, and eventually creating man, uh, and getting angry at man because of sin, and so trying to destroy the earth with a flood. The Atrahasis provides a much better parallel with Genesis, but is flawed in so many ways. It's hard to begin. All of the ancient pagan mythology begins with the proposition that the heavens and the earth began with some kind of a creation. Now, they believe that the heaven and the earth are made up of gods. They're definitely wrong about that, but they're right about there being a beginning. They all posit some kind of a primary supernatural creative event, whether it's Ptah spitting out the gods or uh, the Enuma Elish and Tiamat and Apsu begetting all of the gods, whatever, there is a beginning point. Now, all of them also share a fundamental irrationalism. So, for example, if Tiamat and Apsu were the parents of all of the gods, where did Tiamat and Apsu come from? Since Apsu could die, uh, he also must have had a beginning. Where did he come from? Is Tiamat the eternal one? No, she's not, because Tiamat is later on killed by some other gods. The gods are finite, and the pagan religions are essentially irrational. But there they are. In modern scholarship, it's often very popular to claim that the Egyptian, Sumerian, Babylonian, Hittite, Assyrian, and other mythologies are the foundation for biblical religion. In fact, I believe exactly the opposite is true. The real creation actually happened, and Adam and Eve told that story to their children and their grandchildren. And there was an oral tradition of what had actually happened. As when it was possible, that was written down. And we have an accurate account given by God Himself. And Adam and Eve actually knew that accurate account. So in the beginning, when it was just Adam and Eve there in the garden, they knew that there was one God who had created them several weeks before. That that was accurately known. As sin entered the world and as people began walking away from God and trying to explain the universe that they saw around them, they began making stupid mistakes. And that's what we see today. Uh, Modern people looking at the reality of the universe that exists are trying to explain it without the God of reality. That's always going to turn out badly. And everything that we see about the modern secular world is based on the idea that there is no God, we're all on our own, there is no reason for existence, things just happen by random chance and billions of years. The Bible doesn't suggest that or allow for that. So we're going to go back through that and have another look. Let's go through a couple more points. I'm going to go rather quickly through just a couple more things because I kind of like to get done with verse 1. Oh, my. Some of you who've been around me for a while know that I can spend a lot of time in one place. Materialism is the philosophic notion that there is nothing but the material universe. There is no God. It's also sometimes known as atheistic humanism, holds that man or each individual human being is the ultimate supreme being. There is nobody out there. The major tenets of atheistic materialism or naturalism is that there is no supernatural, there's no God, and therefore all explanations have to be found in the box. The material universe is thought of as a closed system, and every material thing needs to be explained on the basis of some other material thing. When it comes to the existence of matter itself, they normally believe in the eternality of matter. If there was a beginning, then there will be an end, and there must be a purpose, and that means there's a God. They reject that. There is no God. The explanations are in the box, and it's impossible to visualize without God a beginning. So the universe is eternal. There is a big bang at the beginning of the universe. And depending on your point of view about whether the universe is expanding or contracting or is at a steady state, uh, the Big Bang may be just one of many Big Bangs as the universe expands from an explosion and then contracts back into a primordial nut and expands again in another Big Bang and then contracts into, I call that a two-cycle universe. Bang, 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 bang. It's like an old motorcycle. Um, some believe that there is a kind of punctuated equilibrium, that every once in a while something catastrophic happens, but most of the time evolution just keeps going and keeps going and keeps going. Uh, the uh, materialistic worldview believes in deep time, lots of time, because they also believe in macroevolution. Now, everybody understands microevolution. Uh, Geneticists can work with horses and get horses that are particularly good at running or particularly good at pulling sleds or whatever. They can work with bacteria and make one even more dangerous than it used to be. That apparently is what the scientists in China have been doing with viruses. We know that evolution happens in that way. It's a microevolution. So one virus evolves into a different kind of a virus. We know that. But nobody has ever been able to demonstrate that one kind or species can evolve into a different species. That would require going outside of the genetic code. It would be an extraordinarily complex thing to ever happen once. And to say that this happens routinely is frankly nonsense. There's another kind of movement out there. There's an institute called the Biologic Institute that is a group of people who claim to be Christians, a group of scholars even who claim to be Christians. And I don't know any of them, so I can't really disagree with their claim to being Christians. God will judge that. Who attempt to harmonize scripture with atheistic materialism. They say that, well, let's look at the tenets of theistic evolution. So God is the creator. They believe in God. They believe that God is the supreme being and that he did, in fact, create the universe. However, he didn't do it the way we're told he did it in Genesis 1. He rather used naturalistic means, as argued by modern scientists. And when modern scientists change their minds about how evolution happened, that means that the modern scientists continue to be right, and the Bible continues to be wrong. The Bible must always yield to modern theory, no matter what craziness modern theory comes up with. So these days, modern theory is that there aren't just two genders. There are as many as you would like, as many as you can imagine. That the boys who can't win at the high school track meets can pretend to be girls, and that's perfectly okay. Everything is wonderful now. Um, that's actually stupid, but that's their point. The Bible needs to always yield to modern theory. They say that evolution did in fact happen, and evolution is how God created the various species. Deep time, billions of years, is absolutely necessary. We see this developed in several major approaches to the Genesis creation account. The first is called the gap theory. This holds that between verse 1 and verse 2, where in Hebrew there is only a comma, um, actually there are billions and billions of years. There's actually some fairly complex approaches to this that see a complete destruction of the old heaven and earth. So in Genesis 1:1, there was a creation of a heaven and earth. There was a creation of creatures and maybe a different kind of man or something, and a fall happened, and sin happened, and a destruction of the old heaven and earth happened. Uh, and it took billions of years for all of that to happen. And verse 2 is the description of a recreation of the old heaven and earth. Later on, there's going to be a judgment of the present heaven and earth, and a third heaven and earth will be created. It won't be a new heaven and earth, it'll be a yet another heaven and earth. Goes back to a kind of a two-cycle approach like the Big Bang. So they hold to that gap theory. There's a lot of time. Others hold that the 6 days of creation are not days at all, but actually billions of years. So it took billions of years for the stars to form, and billions more for the expanse to form, and billions of years for the land to come up out of the sea, and so on. We call that the day age theory. The biggest problem with that is when we get to the Ten Commandments. God says, "For in 6 days God created the heavens and the earth. The seventh day he rested. Therefore you should work for 6 days and rest on the seventh day." Uh, you should work a billion years, 6 billion years before you get a billion years of break. Doesn't make sense. The day age theory is still extremely popular. It's irrational, but it's still very possible. Uh, the framework theory is actually fairly complex. Bruce Waltke, a famous, relatively conservative Old Testament scholar, has written Old Testament grammars and Old Testament theology. Very, very important character that I really like. I've met him and I like the guy. But he believes that the days of Genesis should be understood as a poetic framework. So 6 grand eras. And he takes the days as a literary framework for the symbolic account of the creation and not as an actual 6 days with a sequence of events. Even more recently, a character by the name of John Walton, who is still active and still teaching. I've forgotten where he teaches, but he's a relatively conservative guy. He's written an Old Testament survey that is widely used in Bible colleges. Shouldn't be, but is. Wrote a major scholarly work called The Lost World of Genesis 1. And he holds that the cosmos, the heavens and the earth, is the temple of God. One of the great mythological uh, patterns is the conquest temple building motif, where the great god, whoever it is, defeats the chaos god, like Baal defeating Mot, and having defeated the chaos god, builds a temple, and the universe is God's temple. The 6 days of the creation are a poetic way of speaking of the temple functionality of the cosmos. So the material creation is not in view in Genesis. It's actually the um, building of a temple somehow. This is built on an understanding of ancient pagan cosmologies. It's not a way of really understanding Genesis, but it's turned out to be fairly popular. I'm going to speak just very briefly about the age of the Earth. The options are three: very young, young, or very old. The very young argument put forward by Bishop Ussher, Anglican bishop, who used the genealogies for chronology. And this results in a 4004 BC creation. The advantages of that is that it takes the Bible at face value. There are a lot of uh, very important thinkers who hold to that position, and I can't fault them. Uh, there's some other arguments that I think are persuasive, but I understand that there are many people who still use this. And Our older English Bibles, the King James Version in particular, often provides dates in the margins, and that uses the Ussher chronology. And for dates from about Abraham on, this is arguably correct because the genealogies from then on are textually quite clear, and we have good evidence for them. Prior to Abraham, we've got some other problems. The evolutionists uh, put together a very old Earth argument: naturalism, evolution. There's nothing but nature. There is no God. Evolution is how it happened. Or if it's theistic evolution, God is tacked onto the theory. And this begins with geology and fossils. It uses radiometric dating, and it ends up with billions and billions of years. If you're going to argue for billions and billions of years, you've got to explain what was happening during all those billions of years when the only records we have are fairly recent. Uh, Dating the rocks by the fossils and dating the fossils by the rocks is not good science. And believing that the universe is eternal is not good science. So we need another view, and this is being provided by some more modern approaches. The Creation Research Institute and some other scientists who are believers, like the Associates for Biblical Research and the Anthros and Genesis folks, are arguing for creation between 5,000 and 10,000 BC. This is a young Earth, but not quite as young as Ussher view. It uses the Bible as the basic framework, and it accounts for geology and fossils primarily through flood geology. So some key players here: Gleason Archer, Kenneth Kitchen, Gordon Wenham, Derek Kidner. All of these men are either retired or have gone on to glory, but teachers that we should always listen to. I'll end with Jesus' view. Uh, Jesus believed in the creation. He was there after all, John 1:1. In the beginning was the Word. There he was. He was in on it from the beginning. Mark 10:6. But from the beginning of creation, God made them male and female. So, what's the length of time between the beginning of creation and the creation of male and female? Well, 6 days. from the beginning of creation. There they are, male and female. Mark 13:19, from the beginning of creation. Luke 11:50, since the foundation of the world. And in the same sentence, Cain and Abel. There they are, right there at the foundation of the world. Jesus' view is that Genesis is a report of the beginning of all things. And for my money, I wasn't there. Jesus was. I'm going to take his viewpoint on this. That's a, frankly, I know. I was hoping to get through one verse, and it's one difficult verse, and there's a whole lot of material there. This lays the foundation for the rest of biblical theology. Everything else that we know to be true demands that God be the creator. The young earth is one of the symptoms of believing that. I don't believe the young earth because that's just in opposition to modern scientists. I believe the young earth because that's what the Bible actually teaches. One of the symptoms of taking Genesis as history is that it claims a young and recent creation. The scientific dominoes kind of fall where they will from there, but that's a beginning point. So I'm going to end up there. I know I've gone just a little long, but wanted to finish those notes. We'll be back next Wednesday with Genesis 1, 2. We're going to get through all of 2 through 6. Believe it or not, we're going to get all those days, 2 through the end of this chapter. We'll do all 6 days. I won't get to the 7th day until the following week. That's my plan. And a lot of times my plans don't quite work out, but we'll give it a try. Okay. I'm unmuting everybody that would like to. And I'll say bye-bye for now. Hey, it's been fun.
Bye, Dr. John.
Ciao, ciao. Hey, cheers to you, my friend, and all the rest. Thank you for coming. I can't tell you how much I appreciate having this group. You're more fun than you can imagine. And thanks for putting up with an old Bible professor. And God bless. And we'll see you next time. Ciao, ciao.
Ciao a tutti.
Ciao ciao, ciao
Ciao, ciao,
tutti.
ciao a
Bye
tutti.
bye.
Bye bye. Love y'all.